All right, welcome everyone to this Headless e-commerce masterclass. Nice that you all made it here. So today we're going to talk about headless e-commerce. Can be a bit abstract sometimes, so I hope to clarify that in this presentation. It's pretty hype, so you've probably heard a lot about it. But before we begin, I'll do a small introduction of myself and of StoryOfAMS. So I'm Duke, one of the founders of StoryOfAMS and the technical director. And StoryOfAMS is the leading e-commerce agency. So we're fully focused on helping e-commerce brands. And we are redefining the way we buy online. Yeah, here you see a short list of some of the clients that we work with. And the topics for today will be a bit about the theory and a bit about the practical side of things. So first we'll start off with what is headless e-commerce, why headless e-commerce, and for who is headless e-commerce. And then we'll go to the practical side and I'll talk about the different platforms that are out there. So the e-commerce systems and the CMS systems. I'm also going to dive into the technology that is needed to set up a headless e-commerce environment. And I'll do a case study about Perfume.nl, and that's one case of StoryOfAMS. And at the end, there's room for some questions, and I'll answer them. So let's dive into it. So to start off with, what is headless e-commerce? In short, it's that the front end and back end are completely separated from each other. So on the left side, you see a traditional technical architecture. And in a traditional technical architecture, everything is just bundled in an all-in-one solution. For example, in Magento or in WordPress, if you use the template solution there, you have a all-in-one system, and it is a CMS, but it's also the app server, the web server, and the client itself. So it's all one big package. And with headless e-commerce, everything is more separated. So you have your front end, it's a standalone application which communicates with backend services like your headless e-commerce system or your headless CMS or any other microservice. And normally you will serve it over a content delivery network, but more on that later. So why headless e-commerce, and what are the benefits of headless e-commerce? So what's in it for you? These are the main points that I'm going to talk through. So the custom front end, it's optimized for speed, it's API different, it has a decoupled architecture, serverless deployments, and new technologies. To start off with, so the custom front end part. We with StoryOfAMS really believe that if you want to build a brand, you need to stand out. A lot of brands are just too casual and you're just one of all the others. And with a custom front end, you do not have any limitations design-wise. You can just go all out and design your own front end. And it's easier to implement than with the template solution because there's just more flexibility. You're not bound to the structure of it. You can create your own structure. So in this way, you can stand out from the competitors, and you also have more flexibility, content and structure-wise. So in these days, not everything is just based on, okay, I'm going to change this button color and then the conversions go up. Like that's going to have minor impact, but really like the storytelling behind it, that's something that can make you stand out. And with having a custom front end, you can focus more on those things. So like really the storytelling and also like the minor adjustments, like changing a button or changing some of the structure, which also helps conversion. Another thing is that it's optimized for speed. And these days, speed is just super important. If your website is slow, then people are just gonna drop off your website or your web shop. So here's some statistics from Cloudflare. They've measured like what the impact of the load time is on the average conversion rate, and you can see that it drastically decreases when the website is slower. And With a headless solution, you can serve it on a content delivery network. If done in the right way, you're just serving a bunch of HTML and JavaScript files, and preferably on a global delivery network, which means that you just serve your front end from all over the world. So you just have different regions, and you deploy your front end from those different regions. Once the front end is loaded, it's also a single page application. So when you're in it, it's just extremely fast when you go through pages. It doesn't need to load the whole page. It only needs to do the API call to fetch the data of the page. And then you can display the page, and it's just extremely fast. And besides your customers, Google also cares about speed. So especially in May, they're bringing out an update, which is gonna focus more on the speed of your website, and they're gonna even be more strict on ranking websites that are faster. So besides those things, it's also API driven, which is a good thing. So supercharging with microservices. In these days, there's really a thriving API economy. So there are a lot of different SaaS products out there, and they're only getting better and better. And because they only focus on a specific part of the whole journey, for example, Algolia is a smart search, and they only focus on the search part. And if you use them, they just have a lot of knowledge about it. So if you use such services, you can never, like if you create something custom, you can just not compete with the features that they have. So it's just better to leverage that knowledge. So leverage the domain experts. And it also makes your whole structure more flexible and portable, meaning that it's easier to switch out certain components. So maybe like Algolia is now the best solution, but after some time, it's another solution, and you can just easily only switch that part. Well, if you're using like a whole all-in-one solution, it's going to be a massive migration if you need to move from one system to another one. So that's one of the good things of headless e-commerce. It also has a decoupled architecture, and because of that, it has decreased complexity. So it consists of smaller parts. So you have a smaller backend, you have a smaller front end, or most of the times you don't have a backend at all because you use services of other providers. And it just makes it way easier to do smaller independent releases. So you only focus on a small specific part, and you deploy that part, and it's not going to impact the whole system. So like the front end, it cannot break the back end because they're separated. So in traditional systems, and sometimes somebody changes something in the front end, but it cannot render the page anymore, and just breaks the whole web shop, and that just can't happen anymore. And also because you can do these smaller releases, it's just easier to release new features, and your time to market will become way faster. Then serverless deployments. Serverless deployment, what it means is that you don't maintain your own servers. So like you will still have servers, but you don't really see them. So it's all abstracted by other providers like Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure, or their AWS. And you can just rely on their infrastructure. And most of them also offer, or actually all of them, they offer auto-scaling. So what you can do is it will just spin up more instances of the server based on the traffic of the website. So like during nighttime, for example, like nobody is on your web shop, or almost nobody, and you also don't pay anything because the servers are just off. But then when you have a peak moment, for example, let's say Black Friday, and you have a lot of people, it will just spin up more instances, and it will remain fast. So besides it always, like you'll be able to reduce your cost, but also handle like extreme amounts of traffic. Another thing is the security by default, because you don't maintain your own server. You also don't have to do security updates, because those platforms, they are always doing the security updates for you. And the setup also becomes simpler, because you don't need a backend engineer or somebody that's going to spend a massive amount of time to set up the servers and to maintain them. It's just a visual interface, and you can just click on things to turn it on or off. Like maybe that's a bit too simplified, but it is kind of like that. Another thing is that it uses the latest technologies, and yeah, developers, like I'm also a developer myself, from origin, but developers that do not like old technologies. They want to work with the latest stuff, and that's just how it is. So if you want to attract talent and you still work with PHP or Java, then they're not going to work with you. And it also helps you to compete with agencies, because if agencies, they're like more working with new stuff, then for a developer, it's an easy choice. They have a more variety of projects, but they also work with new things. So to compete with agencies, yeah, it's better to use such technologies. Another thing is to stay on top of trends, like new things are coming out all the time. And because it's more flexible, it's easier to adapt on those trends. So if you use an old system, it's also harder to use a new software. Then for who is headless e-commerce? Yeah, there are a few cases where headless e-commerce is the perfect solution. One of them is high traffic, especially if you have peak moments, because you will drastically reduce your costs. Content focused and storytelling focused web shops or websites, because you can have a custom front end, so it's easier to set up a super sexy front end that is really focused on your brand, on your story. If you want to create custom tools and flows, for example, guided selling is a hot topic. So you just ask a few simple questions and you relate it to your product specifications. And with headless e-commerce, it's easier to create such flows because you have all the flexibility to do whatever you want. And if you have the ambition to grow, like headless e-commerce, in our opinion, it's the future of e-commerce. So if you want to be part of the future, you should just move towards headless. But headless, it's not for everyone. Like if you're a starting brand and you don't have the budget to go headless right away, then you can also start off with the template solution, because templates are still pretty decent. So if you need to start off cheap, then it can be a good solution for you. So I also noted, like, unless you have an in-house tech team, because if you do have the development expertise in-house to create a headless solution, then I would say, like, go for it. But if you need to have a development agency, or you don't know, or you just want to set up something yourself, then it might not be for you. The technology behind it. So there are a lot of e-commerce platforms out there, like more and more being created at this moment, also more and more focusing on headless. In this presentation, I'm gonna focus on a few big ones. And yeah, we've worked with all of them, so it's from personal experience. It's just not from some list I found online. And to start off with Magento. So it is stable, it works, like it is out there for a long time. So it has proven itself that it works. But yeah, for me, that's all, because the API is extremely slow. We've tried to use Magento as a headless solution, but it was just not workable because it was too slow. It just wasn't a nice user experience. Now the admin user interface, it's pretty outdated. Like, just want to work with a smooth, clean system, and it just looks like it's, I don't know, from a long time ago. And the servers are pretty expensive, so it doesn't really support serverless. So you need to do it with quite expensive servers. And for who is it? Medium-sized brands. So I think, yeah, it can be pretty expensive. So like normally it's not super small brands that use it, but yeah, like the extremely big brands, they also don't use it because it's just not flexible enough, and it's a bit outdated. I added the plus minus for open source because I do like open source. It has its benefits, but on the other side, because it's open source, it's also less maintained sometimes than a solution that you do pay for. And it does mean that you need to host it yourself most of the times. They do offer hosted solutions, but most of the people use Magento self-hosted. And we move on to WooCommerce. One of the bonuses of WooCommerce is low cost. It's pretty easy to set up yourself. They have a big plugin ecosystem. So it's, if you use the template solution, it's quite plug and play. As well, open source. So normally you use it self-hosted. So you do normally have a server yourself. But one of my biggest issues with it is that it's actually not meant for e-commerce. So WooCommerce, it's based on WordPress. And if you look at this list of the 4 ones that I put in, this is the only one that isn't originally created to be an e-commerce system. So it's actually meant to be a blog system, and WooCommerce, they kind of hacked an e-commerce system in it. It does work. I think if you're starting off, it can be a nice solution. We have also used with the API, and it's not optimal for headless. It can be done, but if you're going to go for WooCommerce, I would just go for the template solution. Then Shopify. Shopify is in our opinion in this list the recommended solution. It has an excellent API, including GraphQL, which is a format that just makes it more flexible to develop with. It scales with you, so they also do offer template solutions, which are really easily to set up, but you can then scale it to a headless solution without moving systems. It has a really big app ecosystem. Most apps are paid, but like they're also, if I compare them to WooCommerce apps, they're also most of the time just better worked out because they're getting money in for the apps, so they have more urgency to maintain the apps. And from Shopify, it's a requirement that if you have an app, you do need to offer support for it. It has a good admin user interface. It's pretty smooth to use, so it's just for your staff as well. It's nice to use. Then maybe the only downside is relatively expensive compared to the other ones, but you also get what you pay for. So certainly in this case. And for who is it? You can start off with a small template solution, but it also scales to enterprise brands. So they also have Shopify Plus, which is really focused on enterprise customers. So moving on to BigCommerce. After Shopify, I would say this is also a good system. The API is decent, and it's very customizable. I added the plus minus because customizability is nice, but it also brings complexity with it. So do you need to have all, at least for the front end, you want to be completely free in what you customize, but for the back end, like if the processes work for you, then is it needed to customize it? The app ecosystem is pretty small. So compared to Shopify, it's just way smaller. And we've seen that the startup time can be pretty long if you want to start with BigCommerce. And for who is it? It's mainly for enterprise brands. So I don't really like the template solutions that they have. But for headless, it's pretty decent, but it's more enterprise focused. And as I already said, we have experience with all the platforms, so I've worked with all of them, and it's not based on some online list. It's with real experience. Then, so with those systems, if you're going to use them headless, it is like really focused on e-commerce. So Shopify as well and BigCommerce, it's not a content system; it's a e-commerce system. So we do think it is almost always needed to also use a headless CMS with it. I'm not going into the same depth, but I have a list here of few headless CMS solutions. At this moment, Storyblock would be really our preferred one. Both Storyblock and Prismic, they're kind of the new kids on the block. But after using both, we've liked Storyblock better because it has really a visual editor, so you can edit parts of the website and you can also instantly see it, which used to be like a big issue with headless CMSs, that it was hard to kind of see what you're editing. And they also do like have integration fields, so you can connect it with Shopify, that you can pull all the Shopify products into your headless CMS, so you can also use your product data in your CMS, so it feels more integrated with each other. So I said Prismic is also a decent solution. Contentful, it's also nice, but it's pretty expensive. It's getting expensive really quick, especially if you need to have, if there's like a certain limit of languages and you go over that, it's pretty high. It's like 10, but then it's like an extreme amount a month that you need to pay for it. And Adobe Experience Manager, it's also decent. It's a lot more enterprise focused. So if I needed to recommend one, it would really be Storyblock. Technology that you need to use. For the front-end frameworks, there are a few ones that you can choose from. They're all JavaScript based. If you're working in bigger teams, I would really recommend to use TypeScript. It's a superset of JavaScript. You can use it with all these three. But our recommended solution would be React. And it is because it's been around for quite long, so it's really stable, but it just has the biggest community by far, and which results in just a big ecosystem of libraries for it. So it's just faster to develop something. Vue.js, in this list, they are kind of the new kid on the block. I also like Vue, but I think it's a bit early still, so that's why I would recommend React. And Angular is more the oldest one of all, but I think they're losing this race. Then something that I want to touch upon is static site generators. So on top of React or Vue or Angular, you can put a framework for static deployments. So what it does, it converts your code into a plain HTML or JavaScript version based on the information it pulls from your backend. So something that came with single-page applications was that it was hard for Google and other bots to index it because it's just a lot of JavaScript and not the plain HTML that they're used to. Then something was introduced, it's called server-side rendering, which kind of did that conversion to HTML like in real time. But now you have something which is called static deployments, and that really does it even before you pull it. So every time you go to the website, it generates a static version of the website, and then next time that somebody goes to it, it already has that static version of the website. So you just instantly get it, and you can also deploy it on the global CDN. So React has two options, Next and Gatsby, or actually they have a lot of options, but I've just highlighted two. We really like to work with Next, so that will be our preferred solution. For Vue, you have Next and you have GridSum, also both decent solutions. And then for Angular, you actually only have one, and that is Scully. So that's kind of also what you see here, like, and the community is just becoming smaller and smaller. And for the other two, you just have a lot of different options, but these are the biggest ones. And then for hybrid app frameworks, so that's one other kind of beautiful thing about using headless. You can pull your data from anywhere. So if you ever want to have a native app, you can just use the same API as that your front end uses. I do think that in these days, it doesn't really make sense to build a separate iOS and Android application. Like with these frameworks, you can just create one app, one code base, and you can deploy it both on iOS and on Android. If people still tell you like, hey, it's not really native, you cannot use native modules like the camera, that's nonsense. That's just not true. Like it's almost exactly the same as a native application. You might have some limitations with like super new features that are coming out, but yeah, I would always use a hybrid app framework. And I've noted down here React Native and Flutter. Like Flutter is pretty new, it's from Google. React Native is around already for quite a long time. So at this moment, I would still choose for React Native, and especially if you also work with React for your web shop itself, then it's just easier for your developers to work with both. Then we move on to headless e-commerce in practice. So I wanted to highlight a case. It's a case of Story of Amps. We've worked with Perfume.nl. They're one of the biggest perfume retailers in the Netherlands. And yeah, they really wanted to create a cutting edge platform just with the latest technologies and to just focus on the whole user journey. And they did come with some challenges because originally they used Magento. They have extreme peak traffic. They're quite ad fueled, so A/B testing is important for them. And they have a distribution partner, so everything needed to be automated. So to start off with, we've tried to work with them with the Magento API, but it was just not usable. It was hosted on Byte, which is one of the best hosting platforms for Magento, but the API was just too slow. So it just, for us, it didn't make the cut. We couldn't work with it. We said like, okay, you really need to move to another solution which is better, Shopify. And not only just because we think it's a lot nicer, but just because the experience, it's just not something that we stand behind. So we need to do some data migration, move everything over from Magento to Shopify. Luckily, Shopify does come with some out-of-the-box migration tools. So it actually wasn't that hard to move all the data over. And Shopify Plus was also needed because a custom checkout was needed. And that's something, if you don't, you can use Shopify without Plus for a headless solution, but if you don't use Plus, then you don't have a custom checkout, and there are a few other things. If you do a lot of like selling in multiple regions, then you can have like a top organization and you can have multiple stores behind it. So that's another reason for Plus, but yeah, for this case, it was the custom checkout. And we really just want to use the best solution in the market. So another thing that we implemented here was Algolia. I used in one of the examples earlier, but Algolia is a flexible AI-powered search platform. So their search is just extremely fast. Like you type something and it gets the results in milliseconds. And you can also have like flexible results. So you can search, and you can search in different collections, but also in products and also in blog articles. So you kind of all combine that in one search. And it's also really smart. So it doesn't matter if you mistype something. It also automatically translates strings. So it matches it, regardless of the language that you search in. And you can even have smart things in it that you can see, like, hey, you have analytics, like how many people are searching for a specific search term, or even seeing, okay, which pages have the most hits, and then base the ranking on that. Another thing is the Perfume Finder. It's a chatbot to help customers to find the products that they need. So this is a shape of guided selling. So within the chat, it's like not a completely free chat. So you need to select options. So it just asks you questions in kind of a playful way, and then you can select the answer that is best fitting for you. And then in the end, you get a bunch of products like based on your answers. And this way of guided selling, it really boosts conversion, and it also, customers just like to do it kind of in a playful way, especially if they don't know what they are searching for. Another thing, so it needed to be optimized for A/B testing. So what we did is that the experience of the website, it could be changed based on something that you add in the URL. So with a specific ad for a specific theme, it could add something to the URL, and then the UI of the website would completely change. Like all the colors would look different, giving just another experience that is better fitting for that specific user, or that's what they're measuring with the A/B testing. So we think that's pretty cool. I don't think you can do that easily with a template solution. Like for this use case, like Headless is amazing that you can do these things. It's also built to scale, so they have really high peak moments, especially with days like Black Friday. So it was crucial that it didn't overload the system. So here is a little technical architecture of how it's set up. So we have the storefront in React. It's deployed statically. It communicates with Prismic, the Prismic CMS. So one of the CMSs that I showed earlier. It uses Shopify Headless to get all the product data, to make the orders, customer data, those kind of things. And it uses Algolia as a search API. And there are a bunch of microservices in between. For example, Shopify and the distribution partner. Like, it is not a super common distribution partner. So Shopify didn't have an out-of-the-box solution. That's why we created the microservice, which makes it communicate between the two. So that microservice is just kind of like a transportation layer between it. It isn't that complex. It's quite simple actually, and it just moves data between the two. And we did the same for the integration between the Shopify products and the Algolia search API. And it's all deployed serverlessly. So that way, like, you can have 1 million people at the website at the same time, and you wouldn't notice any difference in speed. Alrighty, we're already at the end of the presentation. So it's time for some questions and answers. People sent them, I've seen, let me check. I've seen some questions coming in. I don't think I can do all, but I will answer a few of them. I see this one multiple times. It comes down to, what does it cost to go headless? Yeah, it's pretty hard to put the exact cost on it, but it also depends like of the scale of your system. Like, you do need to pay for your different services. So you need to have like a Shopify subscription and a subscription for Storyblock, but they start pretty low. So like that monthly cost can be below 50 euros. And then because it's deployed statically, it's also not that expensive to host your front end. We normally use Versal, and it's around like 20 euros a month. So I really think like maybe you need a few apps here and there, but I really think your whole hosting setup can be below 100 euros a month. But of course, if you have a crazy amount of traffic, it can go up, but it will not skyrocket. So we think it's relatively cheap. If you go for enterprise solutions, for example, Shopify Plus, it can become more expensive. But yeah, I think it's mainly like the initial cost can be higher to start with headless, because you do need to build your whole custom front end. You do not start with a template, but in the long term, like on development costs, it will be a lot cheaper, because we've seen with template solutions, sometimes like something seems super simple and small, but it just takes a lot of effort to implement it, because it's just nested so deep in the core of the template or the traditional architecture. So with the headless solution, it's just, you can do smaller iterations, and it's just easier to tackle those small issues as well. So I think like maybe initial costs are a bit higher, but on the long term, you are really going to reduce costs. I hope that answers the question. Another one, what is wrong with a template solution? So I don't think anything is wrong with the template solution. I even think like template solutions are the best for some use cases. It really depends on the use case. But I also believe that headless e-commerce, that it is the future of e-commerce. So it's probably going to become more easy to work with it. And so now, like, you do need some kind of development expertise, or work with an agency that has that expertise for you. But those things will also change, like technology is changing. So at this point, I don't think anything is wrong with the template solution. I just don't think it's like, if you get to a certain scale, I do think you should move from a template to a headless solution. Okay, another one, a more technical one. What is the difference between React and Gatsby? So Gatsby does work with React, so they're kind of two separate things. So Gatsby is a framework for React. So it's kind of a layer around React, which makes static deployments feasible. So it does the static site generation for you. So you can use both in the same solution. So that's normally how you do it. You use React and you use something like Next or Gatsby in this case to have this other layer around your React application. Okay, one more, and that is what big brands use headless e-commerce. There's a lot out there. I think you can go to I think it's easiest to just go to the websites of Shopify or BigCommerce and you see a big list. Kylie Cosmetics uses it in America, like Staples, extremely big. Heinz, Heinz Ketchup uses it. So a lot of big e-commerce brands are using it. If you go to there, you can see a lot of cases, and it just makes it a bit easier to also see like, hey, what actual practical examples are there out there. Alrighty, that's it. I've hoped you learned something today, and hopefully see you next time.